New Orleans Saints rookie edge rusher Fadil Diggs might be a 7th round pick, but he's worth all of your attention during training camp. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to break down RPOs, Kellen Moore's use of them, and how they could help the New Orleans Saints, including their young running backs, why you shouldn't forget about one undrafted free agent in Jasheen Davis, and why you certainly shouldn't rule out the possibility of 7th round rookie Fadil Diggs earning a roster spot. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. New Orleans Saints 7th round rookie edge rusher Fadil Diggs might be a 7th rounder, but that doesn't mean that he can't make a roster here in 2025. And you'll remember we just broke down in yesterday's episode as we continue through, and today actually kind of wrap up our rookie series. I'll explain the kind of here in a moment. But we just talked about tight end Moliki Mataval and him being a 7th rounder and how we shouldn't put a lot of expectations on him and all those other things. Well, I'm completely reversing course here when it comes to Fadil Diggs. And this isn't new, right? We've talked about Fadil Diggs since before the draft, and, you know, he had visited with the Saints pre-draft and all this other stuff. And so he is somebody that's been on the radar for a while, and he's a perfect fit specifically for what it is that the New Orleans Saints are looking for. Remember, when we talked about Moliki Mataval, one of the things that we said was that, like, there's 5 players ahead of him that have been on NFL rosters just last year. And then there's another 2 players that were on practice squads ahead of him. The same type of congestion isn't really there for Fadil Diggs, who comes in serving the exact prototype of what it is that the New Orleans Saints need as they try to take their former roster and then now mold it to this new sort of 3-4 approach for Brandon Staley. Now, granted, the New Orleans Saints made a lot of moves and kept a lot of players around that are immediately fits in what it is that Brandon Staley, my apologies, is going to be looking to do over on that side of the football. Guys like Chase Young, Carl Granderson, they have stand-up edge rusher experience. It's something that they've done very well. They're both athletic players. They've slimmed down to be ready for this role, all those other things, particularly Carl Granderson. So you know that they're good fits, and they are the leading pass rushers in terms of the stand-up edge rushers for this team going into 2025. Cam Jordan, also still somebody that will be able to contribute from there, but is going to see, you know, a part of a rotation, right? We saw him play a career low in snap percentage last year. I expect that he'll maintain probably right around that same area of usage here in 2025. And now that's kind of it when it comes to the edge rusher position. Now you got to figure out what's going to happen with Isaiah Foskey, who granted was on an NFL roster last year, but seeing the Saints keep 4 or 5 edge rushers, stand-up edge rushers, would not be a surprising thing going into this 2025 season. And so Fadil Diggs coming in as a 7th rounder who prototypically fits exactly what it is that the New Orleans Saints need, that's something. And him being selected by this very draft class, a guy that was considered an early day 3 pick by many that ended up kind of falling throughout the draft, likely because the edge rusher pool and rush happened early. So you saw a lot of teams not necessarily reach for edge rushers or sprint for edge rushers in day 3. And so that led to some of these guys falling back. And this worked out really well for the Saints, being able to grab Fadil Diggs at 254th overall, a guy that probably should have gone in the 4th or 5th round. Coming in from Syracuse, but spent his time at Texas A&M, has worked with an elite developer throughout his collegiate career as well, in Elijah Robinson, somebody that has helped a lot of other players, Kingsley Keke, Nnamdi Madubuike, you look at DeMarvin Leal, like a lot of these players that came from Texas A&M to the league did so because they were working with Elijah Robinson, who's an elite developer of the position, and he's also a fantastic recruit. So you always saw him go after the best talent. and then help that best talent continue to develop and get better. That is sort of the school from which Fadil Diggs is coming from. Spent time with Elijah Robinson in Texas A&M, and then when he transferred or was hired by Syracuse to be the defensive coordinator, Fadil Diggs transferred to go with him, and as well as some of the other coaches there that he already had a good relationship with. Now he comes to New Orleans, and he's going to be working with Brandon Staley. He's going to be working with Jay Rodgers. He's going to be working with Bo Davis, who's one of the best defensive line coaches in football. And so all of that comes together to potentially allow Fadil Diggs to take that early development that he's already had with extensive collection of pass rush moves, that he has a unique blend of size and length and speed. All of it's there for him. And so is the production. So we're not just talking about a 6'5" impressive athlete that can convert speed to power. No, we're not reprising those kinds of conversations. We're talking about an entirely new sort of deployment for edge rushers. And among that, every single one of the boxes that's necessary to be successful as that kind of edge rusher, the stand-up 3-4 outside linebacker type of edge rusher, if you will. These are all things that Fadil Diggs does extremely well. 6'5", 257 pounds, 4.57 speed, 33-inch arms, 10 3/8-inch hands as well. This guy has everything when it comes to the things that you can't teach: size, length, speed. Production-wise, he also backed all of it up during his career. 32.5 tackles for a loss. So somebody that's been pesky, not just as a pass rusher, but also getting involved in the run game, being active in the flats and on the outlet passes, things like that. But also 15.5 sacks, along with 4 forced fumbles as well. So he's somebody that has shown a propensity to get after the quarterback, to finish at the quarterback, and to also be disruptive when it comes to getting the football out of the quarterback's hands. All of these things are things that the New Orleans Saints absolutely need from this position. And even though it might not necessarily be Fadil Diggs' year in 2025, if he takes all of these tools that he has and he's able to fold them into what it is that he's going to have the opportunity to do here in New Orleans, and he just starts to kind of chip away at all of it, 2026, 2027, 2028, this guy's got a legitimate shot to be one of those 7th-round picks that sticks on a roster. The NFL isn't just made of first-round picks. The NFL is made of a lot of day 3 and undrafted free agent guys, and no one knows that better than the New Orleans Saints, right? I mean, you look at the history of Marcus Colston, you go back to guys that were drafted late in day 3, Caden Ellis, like still somebody I think the Saints might regret letting walk out of the building, or not necessarily letting, but fighting harder to keep, not giving a premier role, all of those things. Like there are those players that have been, Zach Strief, right? 6th-round pick. Like there are those players that have consistently contributed from this area of the draft. Does that mean that Fadil Diggs is a guarantee to do so? Absolutely not. He's got to go into training camp and he's got to earn every opportunity. He'll probably end up on a practice squad, which gives him the opportunity then to continue to develop as well. He has been a very, very durable player. We talked about durability being a big emphasis in this draft class. Tyler Shough's the only guy that's missed more than 3 or 4 games in a single season when it comes to this entire draft class. And those injuries that Tyler Shough has, the Saints are not concerned about, or has in his history, rather, the Saints are not concerned about. And so Fadil Diggs checks that same durability box. He was a 2-time team captain before he went over to Syracuse. And the only reason why he probably wasn't a team captain in Syracuse was because of the fact that he was brand new to the team, but he was still very much a big part of that team culture over with the Orange as well. So I'm high on Fadil Diggs. I really am, and probably higher than a lot of other folks are, and that's okay. I just think he's got really good burst. He plays a very physical style of the game. When he gets his hands on you, he's taking you down. He's got good and a wide array of pass rush moves, and he has the ability to win as the prototypical new style of edge rusher that the New Orleans Saints have so desperately needed for so long, and now are ready to deploy and utilize properly in this Brandon Staley defense. So yes, Fadil Diggs might be a 7th-round pick, but he's worth your attention during those 9 days of open training camp practices that you'll get an opportunity to see. Coming up next, Fadil Diggs isn't the only edge rusher to watch as a rookie. I want to take you back to the undrafted free agency class as well and remind you why Jasheen Davis, formerly of Wake Forest, should also be on your radar. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at Gametime, the best place to go to buy your last-minute tickets. We've all waited until the last minute to grab some tickets. Now, all of a sudden, you're having to hustle around, call family, call friends. Hey, you got any tickets I can get off you? You got any tickets I can buy? You got any tickets you can part ways with, whatever it might be? And then maybe you get them in the nick of time, but don't worry if you can't. You got another resource for you. And in fact, I would just go straight to the Gametime app. They'll get you all taken care of. Saving folks up to 60% sometimes on those last minute tickets. They've got great zone deals as well. Everything from the NFL. You can start to buy your Saints game tickets now, as well as a bunch of other events, comedy, sports. Go and check them out because you can take all the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Gametime today. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, family. Fadil Diggs isn't the only rookie edge rusher to keep your eyes on out at training camp. I want to remind you about undrafted free agent rookie Jasheen Davis. We're going to continue our rookie outlooks here over the course of the next couple of episodes because I want to re-highlight some of those undrafted free agents we haven't talked about in a little while. And I remembered when we got one of our questions from Terry, one of our insiders, around like some of the undrafted free agents that can make the roster that haven't talked about a lot of the undrafted free agents. We dug in on like Easton Kilty and a couple of others, but we haven't really gone through like those top guys that can potentially earn a roster spot. And because of the way that the depth chart looks right now for the Saints at edge, there are opportunities for these edge rushers to potentially land on rosters. And we see defensive linemen, particularly undrafted defensive linemen, make rosters constantly. It's one of the positions that is most popular, or not necessarily most populated, but the numbers on a roster typically work out to create additional opportunities for some of these undrafted guys, much like the secondary, for instance. And so for a team like New Orleans, who is, again, transitioning from that multiple front, but typically even front defense that they had last year, and really for several years since Dennis Allen has been in the mix, to now going to this 3-4 defense, we've highlighted that a lot of players actually do fit, but the question is, how quickly can they learn sort of the new system, right? How quickly can Isaiah Foskey get things figured out? How quickly can, Chase Young and Carl Granderson remain impactful and stay on the field as well? Like, you got to have those other guys behind them that could potentially rotate in, or that can come in the need, when there's a need at the position as well. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm heavily focused on this edge rusher position, because I'm not entirely sold on it as it's immediately constructed, which would have your top three guys that you already know in Chase Young, Carl Granderson, and Cam Jordan. You can't just go into the season with that. Like, you have to have more. You've got to have other rotational pieces. You have to have depth, all of that other stuff. And we don't know about Isaiah Foskey just yet, though I do think that this change from the Dennis Allen system to the Isaiah Foskey system to the Brandon Staley system could work well for Isaiah Foskey. But he's kind of now in the same place as Fadil Diggs, as well as Jasheen Davis. So they're all going to be very interesting to watch. Chris Rumph, you might want to throw in there as well. He's been with Brandon Staley in the past, all that. So there are these players that are going to get these opportunities, but I think that when you look at just the pure build of some of them, you kind of see where the excitement comes from for this team when it comes to landing some of these guys. And so Jasheen Davis is one that has absolutely stood out to me. 6'3", 270 pounds. He's got a very similar build to Marshall's Mike Green, who was drafted, who fell in the draft because of a lot of off-field stuff, which you can look up, because I don't want to talk about what it is and then get something wrong. That would be insensitive. But, Mike Green fell in the draft for a reason, and it's pretty clear. And this guy, Jasheen Davis, has a very similar build. He's sub 6'4" or 6'5", but he's got that 270-pound frame. And much like Fadil Diggs, has a ton of production, 25 and a half sacks during his time at Wake Forest over the course of his career, and an eye-popping 51 tackles for a loss as well. So both of those numbers, by the way, helped Jasheen Davis finish third in school history in sacks and second in school history in career tackles for a loss. So now he brings that pace with him to New Orleans, along with the 6'3", 270-pound frame, along with a really, really good set of pass rushing moves, kind of similar to Fadil Diggs. He's got an array of pass rushing moves as opposed to being a guy that kind of relies on being like a one note kind of pass rusher. Like I have this one move that served me really well all throughout my career in college. Didn't find a need to really develop beyond that. And so because of that, this is what I do, right? This is my move and everything like that. He doesn't have that. He has a lot of different moves that he'll stitch together, that he'll counter rush with. When somebody counters his initial rush, he has an answer. He's got a good pass rush plan. And because of his build at 6'3", 270 pounds, one of the other values with him is his versatility. Yeah, I'm sure he could stand up and rush as well, but he spent a lot of his time as a hand in the dirt 4-3 pass rusher with Wake Forest, making him a pretty good option to compete and contend as a 3-4 defensive end as well, and somebody that could probably stand up on the edge and rush too. And so you get a little bit of versatility in that way. We highlighted the versatility on the interior, guys that can play not only nose tackle, but also be one of those 3-4 defensive ends, and could also be a guy that plugs in as a 3 tech if asked, or a 1 tech if asked, in an even man front. But with Diggs, he's one of the rare options that the Saints have that could stand up and then could go and put his hand in the dirt, along with maybe Cam Jordan, maybe Jonah Williams might be somebody to watch like that, maybe Chris Rumph. And so that's kind of it. I mean, Chase Young's definitely has that ability too, I would say, but Chase Young, you know what he's doing. So Davis is an intriguing prospect from that focus, because he does something a little bit different than the other guys do. One of the other things that he does really well is kind of like we just talked about with Fadil Diggs. He finishes plays at the quarterback. When he gets to the passer, he's got a knack for getting that passer to the ground. I think that is very much heavily displayed in his 26.5 career sacks. But if you watch his tape, you see that he rarely misses those tackles. He doesn't walk away with almost sacks. He gets quarterbacks to the ground. And I think that that's really good. I think that that sort of collection of pass rushing moves that he has as well, the polish that he has coming into the league, all of that is really, really impressive and puts him in position to battle with guys like Fadil Diggs and Isaiah Foskey and Chris Rumph and others that are going to be kind of vying for that stand-up edge rusher, outside pass rusher position. And he's a really intriguing player and option, especially with that versatility. When he was speaking with Matt Moscona over at Locked on LSU, over on ESPN 104.5 up in Baton Rouge, our partners that are effectively people that power LouisianaSports.net. One of the things that he said was that, like, the quotes right here, looking at the depth chart, I feel like I have an opportunity to come in and make a name for myself. And so he's aware of the opportunity that's ahead of him too. You know, it was really interesting. This I'm going to get on a Pelicans tangent for a moment, but I promise I'm going to come back to it. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the Pelicans draft class was Derek Queen. And when Derek Queen was talking about how, you know, he's this big center, right? And he was being asked about, like, what do you think about all those guys that were taken in front of you and everything like that? And he said, like, I think I'm better than all of them. And I loved that attitude from that player and from any player in that organization, because I feel like you should have that attitude. And the Pelicans didn't really have anybody like that. And so I love seeing that from a guy like Derek Queen. Similarly here with Jasheen Davis, I love the fact that he's like, yeah, I'm coming in to challenge everybody that's already on that depth chart. I looked at the depth chart and I said, I could help. I like what I see here for me. I like that. Like, I think that's a great way to be. Now, if it doesn't pan out and it doesn't work and he doesn't even grab a practice squad spot, fine. Like, no one's going to remember that he said that or anything. Like, it's all good. But I love him coming in with that attitude and saying, like, yeah, I looked at the depth chart. I think I can come in and make a name for myself. Awesome. Not disrespectful to the players that are there, but being confident about himself. Bingo. Absolutely love that for Jasheen Davis. So Jasheen Davis and Fadil Diggs, absolutely two guys that late draft picks, undrafted guys, or late draft pick and undrafted guy, right? 1 and 1. Still worth your time to absolutely be watching and see what they might be able to do. Because if those guys pan out and develop and build on what they already have, that's kind of God-given, there's a lot of opportunity for these guys on the field over the years throughout their rookie contracts. And so it could get started here in 2025. All right, coming up next, I want to discuss RPOs. What are they? How Kellen Moore uses them and why they could be successful if implemented in this new New Orleans Saints offense. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are on a mission to try to get ahead of what Kellen Moore is looking to bring to this New Orleans Saints offense. And so we've been looking at a bunch of kind of the smaller things that he does, right? We broke down all the big things that he does, uses of motion, crossing routes, all that stuff from previous episodes. Now we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty play action and protection calls and pre-snap reads and all this stuff. And so one of the other things I wanted to look at after looking at play action was RPOs, the run pass option. So what I want to do is focus on what the RPO is, what a run pass option is, how Kellen Moore has utilized them, and why it can work in New Orleans, and particularly with the two young quarterbacks. So as we continue to kind of dig through these little, smaller nuances that Kellen Moore brings to the game, it becomes really interesting to see, like, okay, how does this fit the player personnel? And this is a situation, the RPO, that fits the personnel extremely, extremely well. And another one is going to be tempo that we'll take a look at. I think I'll wait for that one. Nick Underhill put out a really, really great bar graph on like how much Kellen Moore's Eagles used tempo last year, no huddle versus the Saints, and what we could expect out of that and everything like that. So make sure you go and support Nick. I'm sure he and I will be talking about that later on this month. But so we'll come back around to tempo. But RPO is a really interesting one. And this is one of those things that like you just kind of add to an offense if it works for your personnel. And that isn't necessarily a like, oh, it's a West Coast thing or a Air Coryell thing or a wide zone thing or whatever. It's not really like that. It's just like, can your quarterback do it? And can you call it? And can you utilize it? And can you design it? And the answer to all those questions for New Orleans right now is yes. So let's start off with what is an RPO. An RPO, which is something we've seen really kind of permeate from college into the pros. A couple of years ago, we would have never really been talking about RPOs. Now we talk about them pretty consistently. And that is one of those things that has come up from the collegiate ranks, as is often the case with the NFL. But the idea of an RPO is a play that allows a quarterback after the snap to get a heads up read on the defense, and at the mesh point, which is the exchange point between the running back and the quarterback when you go to hand the ball off, make the decision. Am I going to hand the ball off to that running back? Or based on what I'm seeing from the defense, am I instead going to pull that ball, keep it, and look to throw it, right? We're used to read options that we see in the NFL all the time, which is different from an RPO, which would typically be I'm meeting the running back at the mesh point. I've got a heads up read on a key defender off the edge. If that key defender holds, I'm handing the ball off. If that key defender collapses, then I am pulling the ball in and I'm taking the wide run around the edge in that way. So it's kind of like that, but instead of keeping the ball and running, which you could also do in a scramble situation, you're keeping the ball and you're looking to pass. So let's say that you get that screaming defender off the edge, or you get a corner off the edge or whatever, and you see that with that heads up read as you're looking at the mesh point to see what the defense is doing. You could pull the ball and then throw to that vacated area, hit a quick slant where that corner is no longer in coverage. And then all of a sudden you're picking up 6 yards on the slant, 7 yards on the slant. You're at 2nd and 3 and you're in a better situation than you were at 1st and 10, right? Or that nothing happens. Maybe a linebacker drops back in the coverage. You see like a Tampa 2 look and a linebacker in the middle of the field bails out to get depth. And all of a sudden you've got a light box, 4 down linemen and 2 linebackers. You might say, I'm handing this ball off. And now all of a sudden my running back is one-on-one because I got 5 blockers and 6 defenders. So if I get a hat on a hat for each one of those blockers, my running back's got to beat one guy. And if that running back can beat that one guy and go and get 6-7 yards, then that 2nd and 4 or 2nd and 3 is a much better situation than the 1st and 10 where you started. That is exactly how Kellen Moore utilizes these RPOs from what I can tell on tape, right? I don't know what they're talking about in the building, or not in the building. I know what they're talking about in the building, but I don't know what they're talking about like in the huddle or whatever. You know what I mean? But like that's the way that you utilize this is you give your quarterbacks an opportunity to make a good decision. And when those quarterbacks show that they have good decision-making ability, then you trust them to do that. And I think that's what could work here. So that's what an RPO is. That's how Kellen Moore uses it. Now let's get to the quarterbacks and why this works. Spencer Rattler, when he made that transfer from Oklahoma, which was a shotgun-heavy offense, over to South Carolina into that sort of under center pro-style offense, RPOs became a way of living. It became a part of what it is that he does. And he did them very well, operated in that area of the game very well, very consistently, made a lot of good decisions. So that was something that he did extremely well with the South Carolina Gamecocks. Last year, you saw him take almost the most RPO snaps out of the Saints 33 RPO snaps or so from last year, according to Pro Football Reference. About 15 of those were Spencer Rattler. The Saints didn't run a lot of these RPOs. Kellen Moore has skyrocketed his usage of them since he arrived in Los Angeles. From 2019 to 2022, when he was with the Dallas Cowboys, they were kind of middle of the pack, bottom third of the NFL when it came to RPO usage. But then he got to Justin Herbert and he got to the Los Angeles Chargers, and all of a sudden, second in the NFL. Last year with the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Hurts, first in the NFL. No surprise there. So now you also get a guy like Tyler Shough, who was, by the way, in the same Oregon offense that Justin Herbert was. So if Justin Herbert can run the RPO, Tyler Shough can run the RPO, you would imagine. And also, we saw Tyler Shough run the RPO on 13% of his passing attempts last year with Louisville in that Rome family offense, right? And so he comes in with somebody that had completed 43 of his 54 passes in RPO, according to Two Deep Zone, for 520 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns, no interceptions during last year's campaign with Louisville. So you got 2 quarterbacks that are absolutely ready to utilize the RPO. You got a coach that is using it more and more and more, and you have an offense that can stand to benefit from it as another wrinkle and another piece of the innovation that could be showing up here in New Orleans under Kellen Moore. That's a really, really good situation. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to continue going through some of the undrafted free agents you need to know. So we'll take a look at Tyreem Powell, the linebacker out of Rutgers, who you should absolutely be keeping an eye out on. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a party day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.